Hi, I'm Hannah and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about every single book I read during the month of September. Okay, so if you've done one of these before, you know that we usually start off with some stats from my reading month, and then after that we'll get into talking about each book one by one. And I have my story graph up so we can just dive right into it. So during the month of September, I read 12 books. This is slightly up from August, but still pretty low for me in terms of normally the amount of books that I read. Have a stretch goal of reading 200 books a year. I have only met that once, and I literally read exactly 200. Last year, I think I read 191. And it got to the point in December where I was like, I could really push to make this happen, but do I want to? And the answer was no, so I didn't. But I do kind of want to make 200 this year. I don't know. I feel like I'm further away from it than I was last year, so it might not happen regardless. But I do think next year, because I've already started setting up my book journal and I've kind of made it so that there's enough space for 200 books, that I want to. And I think what I'm going to do to accomplish this is a total tangent, by the way. Sorry, we will get back to my September reading. But what I think that I'm going to do is get more into poetry, because it's something I've always really loved and I wanted to do more of, but I just haven't. I don't know why. I don't prioritize buying poetry books because I feel like they're so short most of the time that it doesn't make sense to spend the money on it. But because I am back in my library era, I think that's the perfect place to get poetry books from, other than that I really like to mark them up. So used book sales maybe. Anyway, point being, I read 12 books in September. So let's jump into some more stats. So my top moods based off of Storygraph's moods are adventurous, mysterious, dark, tense, emotional, funny, reflective, inspiring, and hopeful, in that order. For pace, 8% of my books were slow, 75% were medium, and 17% were fast. I read 70% less than 300 pages, 58% 30 to 499 pages, and then 25% were 500 plus. I read 92% nonfiction, 92% fiction, and 8% nonfiction. And my top genres were fantasy, which had 9 books, romance with 7 books, young adult with 3 books, dystopian with 2 books, art, thriller, memoir, and contemporary, all with 1 book each. And for formats, print was 42%, digital was 33%, and audio was 25%. My average rating was 3.92 stars. I had 1 2-star, 2 3-stars, 6 4-stars, and 3 5-stars. And then usually I post kind of my own totals that I like to track. So my total TBR at the end of this month is sitting at 721 books. I didn't unhaul any books this month from my TBR. I read 4 arcs and 8 books. I don't count arcs as books, not because they're not books, but just for purposes of this. 8 books read, 5 were off the shelf, meaning that I read them off my TBR, had never read them before. 1 was a reread, and then 2 were from the library. Oh, and then I acquired 21 books this month, which is so many books. Someone tell me to stop. We will get into all of my quarter 3 acquisitions in an upcoming video sometime soon. But anyway, what I was saying, I post a tracker on my Instagram stories every single month that kind of tallies where my TBR is at, how many books I read off my TBR, blah, blah, blah. And these numbers differ from those numbers a little bit, mostly because when I have 2 of the same copy of a book on my TBR and I read it, I obviously only read 1 copy, but I count both for my Instagram stories tracker because it did technically remove 2 books from my TBR. That 721 number is capturing every single book, not every individual title. So if I have, for example, Long Live, I have the indie copies of this duology and I have the combined book of this duology. So when I finish the duology, which is 2 books, I will have finished 3 books off of my physical TBR because I have multiple editions. And that's not something that everybody does, I don't think, with their TBRs, but I wouldn't like to count my TBR based on just titles because I feel like that's disingenuous to me when I'm figuring out how many books I've actually bought. If I bought 3 copies of something and I say I put 1 book on my TBR, I don't know. I feel like it deflates your numbers in a way that makes you look better. That's my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. It is totally fine if you do something different to track your books. Also in my home library, library tracker. If you go and look, I have a past Notion video that I did to kind of walk you through how I track all of that in Notion, but I have specific things where I'll say like, this is the Fairy Loot version, this is the Book of the Month version, this is the traditionally published version, this is the indie. So I keep track of all of that. So I am aware that I have multiples of some books, and usually it's for good reasons. Sometimes it's not, like with everything. All right, anyway, now that I've yapped your ear off for a long time, it's been like 10 minutes, but probably when the video airs, it will not be 10 minutes because I'll end up cutting a lot of this out. Let's talk about the books I read in September. Okay, so first up, I gave this one 5 stars. This is The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This is the Fairy Loot version. I really, really enjoyed this book. I'm not normally a big like gothic girl, but everything that Rachel Gillig writes, I have absolutely loved. I think she just nailed the like creepy cathedral vibe without it creeping me out so much that I wasn't able to enjoy the story. Thought the plot was kind of simplistic in this. There's some things that were pretty easy to call, and I know that because I'm very bad at calling things that are plot related, and I wasn't really surprised by anything that went down in this book. However, I think the characters were great. I think the world building, like I said, is where this book really shines. I think there were some really potent themes about trusting your own gut over institutional authority, which led to kind of an interesting examination with the characters that Rachel Gillig put into this book, because they're all sort of blind in their own way. And this story is really about them coming to terms with their own blindness, recognizing it, and then going through the like really excruciating process of like revealing it. And I think there's a lot of imagery with it. The diviners wear shrouds over their eyes. You can see that in this cover. There's kind of like a big focus on eyes, honestly, because the lead male main character in this book has like smeared eyeliner, and it's a big part of his personality and stuff. And I feel like it's just an interesting juxtaposition about eyes, which is cool. Anyway, tangent. This book is about, it's kind of at its core a murder mystery, because the religious system that they have believes in these 5 omens, and there's 6 diviners, which are basically these girls that work in this cathedral to essentially drown, and when they're drowning they hallucinate dreams, is what they call them, and the dreams are of the omens, and they're supposed to tell whoever's asking them to divine whether they have like favor with the gods. It's all very convoluted, but it makes sense when you're reading it. These diviners are supposed to serve for a set number of years, and when these 6 girls are getting really close to the end of their term, they start disappearing in the night one by one. And so our last diviner standing is our lead character here, and she's basically on a mission to figure out what happened to her sisters. So, and they're not actually sisters, but like sisters in the religious kind of like cultish sense. Yeah, I gave this one 5 stars. I really liked it. It does end on a mother of a cliffhanger, so if that's something that bothers you, I would wait until the next one in this series is coming out. I don't know what that book is called or when that's going to be, but this was an excellent read, and I highly recommend if it sounds like something that would work for you. Next up, I won't spend too long on this one because y'all have heard me talk about this book enough, but this was my reread of A Court of Thorns and Roses. This was supposed to last me for like the whole month, but I finished it within the first week. People hate on this book a lot and say like you have to read it and get past it and then you'll enjoy the rest of the series more. I humbly disagree. I think this book is so fun. It's a really good self-contained, I don't want to say retelling of Beauty and the Beast because it does very much start off that way, but it does not finish that way. You can't really appreciate this book until you're rereading it. So this is my 3rd, 4th, 5th? Somewhere in there reread, and I just enjoy it more and more every single time. If you haven't read ACOTAR because you're worried that you're not going to like it, that it's too commercial, that it's just for teenage girls, you're wrong. I think you'll like it. Next up, I read an arc of The Weaver Bride by Lydia Gregovic. This was such an interesting story. I buddy read this with one of my best friends, and I think she liked it a smidge more than I did. I felt like this was murder mystery Bridgerton with a splash of magic. Honestly, if you've read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, it reminded me a lot of that. Not because it's such a trip, but just in the vibes. They're in this big house. They're kind of playing, oh, and the selection. I forgot to add that as a comp because everybody's participating in this game to essentially figure out who's going to marry he's not a prince, but like this is he the prince? I don't remember. He's like this aristocrat. This group of girls, they have this specific magic. They're called the Weavers, or the men are called the Weavers. They're called something witches. Silk witch? It might be silk witch. It's been a while. Anyway, they're only allowed to marry a certain type of magic wielder, kind of like a warlock, wizard type dude. And so he's like the richest, fanciest, best one of the weavers. So it's called the Weaver Bride because it's all these girls. I think there's 10 of them that are participating in this set of challenges to figure out who his bride is going to be. But then on top of that, you're in this Victorian style sort of manner. You're investigating this mystery because the male main character's sister was participating in this challenge the year before and she ended up dead. And so now he's enlisted this girl that's taking her place to essentially help him figure out what happened to her. And he's going to pay her. She's going to be the inside girl or whatever to investigate what the heck went down. Very interesting premise. I thought the plot was really good. I had a good time reading this. It just didn't quite hit that like 5-star feeling for me. But I think if anything that I said sounds remotely intriguing to you, you should try this one. This came out, I think, on September 30th. So it's out now. You can get it. And I hope you enjoy. Next up, I read another arc. This is Tourist Season by Brynne Weaver. This also comes out, or no, this came out on September 23rd. Brynne Weaver is the one that wrote I don't remember what the trilogy's name is. Ruinous Love. It starts with Butcher and Blackbird. There's also Leather and Lark and Scythe and Sparrow in it. This is I don't want to call it a spin-off because it really doesn't have much to do with that series at all, but the character that is the main female character is mentioned very briefly in Butcher and Blackbird. So you do know her, just not very well. So this is kind of her backstory and her own start to, I think it's supposed to be a new trilogy, if I'm not mistaken. The important thing to know about this one, because this has frustrated some people already, I've heard that have read this, is that this is a series, whether it's duology, trilogy, I don't know. But it's all, I think, going to be focused around the same couple. So it's kind of a slow burn in this book. Slow burn very much in the tension and romantic sense. It's not a slow burn in the sexual sense because this is Brynne Weaver. My point is that it's not all wrapped up at the end of the first book. If that is something that you're going in expecting, don't. Everything does not have a neat, tidy bow, whether it's the plot, the romance, the characters, whatever, at the end of book one. That's not something that bothered me personally, but I know it did come up for a few people. So, Tourist Season. I enjoyed this. Thought it was a little bit less addictive and gripping than Butcher and Blackbird. To give you some context, I loved Butcher and Blackbird. I think it was a right book, right time kind of thing because I didn't end up loving Leather and Lark or Scythe and Sparrow. I rated Leather and Lark 3 stars, Scythe and Sparrow 4 stars, Butcher and Blackbird 5 stars. So it kind of like went down and up. I gave Tourist Season 4 stars. I do think it was a good read. If you liked Butcher and Blackbird and that whole trilogy, I think you would like this. If you didn't, I don't think I would read this one. Not because they're exactly the same, but because they're similar enough that I think if you don't like one, you won't like the other, and vice versa. So all that being said, I think everyone should read Tourist Season. It did have a much better sense of place, I thought, than the Ruinous Love trilogy. It's based in Cape Canaveral in Florida. Now I'm like doubting whether it was like in a touristy beach town, hence Tourist Season. Yeah, I thought it was just a fun read. It's not one that I'm going to remember forever. It's not one where I'm dying to get to the next book instantly, but I will probably read it at some point in life. That's Tourist Season by Brynne Weaver. Next up, we've got The Cul-de-sac War by Melissa Ferguson. I believe I got this one at a used book sale at some point or another. To be honest with you, I don't remember much about this book at all. I listened to it on audio. I've talked about this before. Audiobooks just aren't hitting for me very much these days for whatever reason. I don't know. I think this one was boring. I gave it 3 stars. I don't really remember enough about it to even be able to tell you about. This is about 2 neighbors that are kind of in like, I guess, a rivals to lovers situation. I don't think I would recommend this one necessarily, but I also think that I didn't give it the best chance that I could have given it. But because this one didn't go super well, I don't really want to read on. Read on meaning like read it again because this is a standalone. Next up, okay, I'm really excited to talk about this book. This is Year One by Nora Roberts. This was one of my library books this month, so I did read the physical copy but can't hold it up because I already returned it. I don't know why I thought this. One thing about me is that I pretty much don't read the backs of books ever. So I always go into it knowing I feel like less than I should. I thought this one was like a magical boarding school story, and instead it was like apocalyptic, COVID adjacent survival story. It was written in 2017. but it felt like Nora Roberts was just looking into the future with COVID, with the one twist being that it sounds like the virus was caused by magic. These people are getting magical powers, and some of them are using them for good and some of them are not. And so it's kind of the bad magical people that are basically wreaking terror across the whole world. But this book was really genre bending in the sense that it had a little bit of everything. So we have that like survivalist edge, we have a bit of fantasy with the magic, we have some sci-fi with what's going on with the apocalypse. We've got honestly a little bit of like a lit fic vibe just because of the way that Nora Roberts writes. We did have a little bit of romance between some of the characters, but not a ton, and it's the first in a trilogy. So again, it does not wrap up in a neat little bow. I do have books 2 and 3 checked out from the library now because I went and got them after I finished reading this one, and I'm excited to see where it goes. It's going towards a chosen one trope of the female main character's daughter, but we'll see how that unfolds. It's called Year One because this is quite literally year one of the pandemic. They call it the virus, I think, or the blight. I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I know people like to talk a lot of crap about authors that have a giant backlist. Nora Roberts is probably one of the most pervasive in that category. Honestly, everything I've read by Nora Roberts, I've absolutely loved. There's a reason she writes so many books, and she is everywhere. So that's Year One by Nora Roberts. Next, I read Nice Girls Don't Win by Parvati Shallow. This is her memoir. If you don't know Parvati Shallow, she is a game show challenge extraordinaire. She's been on Survivor a number of times and won once, and then she just recently has been on Traitors, and then she went and played on Survivor Australia, and I believe she won the season she was on with that too. So she's so cool. So this is her memoir. She's literally talking through childhood all the way through like right after Traitors, and she shares so much. It's so vulnerable knowing where she grew up and how she grew up and how that's informed the way that she's played and presented herself publicly for her whole adult life was incredibly interesting. So I think if you're into Survivor or you know Parvati already, this would be a great read for you. If you don't know her, I don't know that a lot of what she's talking about will make sense. There's enough glimpses into Survivor and Traitors and all of that that you'll want to have that background, I think, to get the most out of this book. So if you're not already into her, I maybe wouldn't bother with this one. Next up is another arc, Guardians of Dreamdark, if I DNF'd books, which I generally do not, because I always have like hope that it'll get better, and usually it doesn't. But this is a book that I would have DNF'd. I gave it 2 stars. This is supposed to be a middle grade book. Requested the arc because Laini Taylor wrote the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, which I absolutely loved. I read it a couple years ago. This is a re-release of a book that came out in like, I think it's 2007. So it's been a while, but not like super long. I wanted to like it so much more than I did. I feel like there was so much going on. Laini Taylor's writing is very purple. It's flowery, it's beautiful, but there's a lot going on. And in the context of like a middle grade book, it just felt like too much. I couldn't really tell you what happened. I ended up kind of just skimming by the end of it just because I wanted some like resolution. It wasn't my favorite. I'm not even going to tell you what it's about because I don't want to influence your opinion of this book, because I think if it would work for you, it really might work for you. But if you're picking this up just because you've liked Laini Taylor's other work, put that back down. Next up, we've got Warstorm by Victoria Aveyard. Warstorm is the last book in the Red Queen series. I am officially done with the Red Queen series. If you watch these wrap-ups. If you watch my wrap-ups every month, then you'll know that I have been plugging away at getting the Red Queen wrapped up. And it's finally done. The best book by far in the Red Queen was Red Queen. Everything else after that I think is fine. I don't think it's great. I think this was probably my second to least favorite installment. It was so long. It was like, I want to say it was like 650 pages. I ended up switching to audio to finish it because I was like, I need to be done. And the audios are great. If you're going to read this series, I highly recommend the audio. I am not usually a big audio reader with fantasy books particularly, but I think starting off reading it physically helped me a lot to like just then jump into it. I don't know that I can say that I would recommend this series. I feel like if I read it when I was a teenager, I would like it a lot more than I did now, which sucks because I loved Red Queen. One character that I was holding out on like redemption and a good story arc for was Maven, and I don't feel like I got that in this book. which made the whole thing kind of like suck for me. I am keeping it vague on purpose so that no one gets spoiled, but yeah, I think so much more could have been done there that wasn't, and so that disappointed me a lot. I ended up not really caring for Cal by the end. I ended up not really caring that much about Mare. I don't know, I just feel like I was reading it to finish it. I hate when I get to that place with books, but I gave this 3 stars. This is Warstorm by Victoria Aveyard. Next up, I've got The Sleepless by Jen Williams. This was such an interesting read. I read this with Faye as well. The Sleepless is basically about 2 people. This one girl, this magic system is an interesting thing. So she's an orphan. She gets thrown off the cliff in order to be a sacrifice to like the gods at the very beginning of the book. And this sea monster goddess ends up saving her. And so she basically spends the rest of her life in like service to this sea god. And then one day in the forest, she catches this guy trying to steal a sea dragon like egg, and so she's tasked from the sea goddess with going and getting the egg back at whatever cost and killing the thief. The thief is one of the Sleepless, which basically means that he's been kind of cloistered at this like monastery-ish type facility. It's interesting. They're like possessed almost by these like evil beings, and so anytime they fall asleep or lose consciousness, these evil beings take control of their body. So they're called the Sleepless because they basically never sleep, since anytime they are sleeping, this other person's like coming to life. And when they are asleep, they basically are like locked into these cells so that the evil beings can't come out and like wreak havoc. Because most of the time when they figure out that they are possessed by a Sleepless, it's because something bad has happened. So at the beginning of the book, the monastery is like infiltrated and a bunch of the Sleepless are kidnapped except this one guy. And so in order to get help, he steals this sea dragon egg because another god like requests it or something so that she can help. Oh, because she kidnapped all of the other Sleepless that are at this monastery. That's the setup. So then we're on a quest between these two who are basically now deciding to work together so that they can make sure that this, that the kidnapped Sleepless get returned to their monastery, and making sure that the sea dragon egg doesn't get given as a sacrifice to this goddess. So it's kind of convoluted when I'm explaining it. I do not claim to be the best explainer. But, so this had a really interesting plot. It had a really interesting world. I don't feel like the characters were developed super well, but I do think enough is left open for us to get another book, which this is clearly the start in a series. With the way that it wrapped up, I don't know that we needed a second book. I was really, really interested in the dynamic between our main girl, our monk, and the Sleepless guy that comes out at night, right? Because he actually can like talk and interact with people. He's a whole human when he is not locked out of his own consciousness. The concept is very similar. If you've seen the Vampire Diaries, the Travelers in season 5 are really similar to this. But instead of like someone having to like wake up the Travelers, they're just automatically woken up when the person goes to sleep. Anyway, super interesting. It's another one where I will read the sequel at some point when it comes out, but I'm not like itching to do it immediately. All right, next one. We're getting close. Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. This book is so long and there's basically no romance in it. So if you are a big person that reads for romance, I would say you should read a different book. However, it is set up in such a way that I think we will be getting more and more romance in The Ragpicker King. I have not read The Ragpicker King yet. So if you have and you're like, there is no romance in that, feel free to comment below so that we all know what to expect. This is another one that I first started reading the physical and then I switched to listening on audio while I read it. I think that's called like immersion reading or something. Anyway, super helpful for me. Like I said, I'm not retaining things super well with audio, so I think having it being read to me, but then physically actually seeing the words helped me to figure out what was going on. The dynamic is basically that the Swordcatcher is this orphan that gets taken from an orphanage, and his entire task is just to be the bodyguard essentially for the king of the like realm that we're in. The vibe was very much Caledonian in Spain, and I'm totally here for that. I love Caledonian and Spain. Haven't been there, but I do love it. The world building is great. The plot is great. Character development is great. There's a lot to love in here. I do typically like to have romance in my books, so I was like hanging on to the scraps, and I mean scraps of romance that are going on in here. But if you like just straight fantasy, not romantasy, fantasy, I think this will be a really good read for you. I am excited for book 2. I think the 2 characters that I'm most intrigued by had like some of the least page time in here, but it seems like they'll be getting a lot of page time in the next book. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to continue. I have loved Cassandra Clare's work for a long time. I'm not done with the whole Shadowhunter series, but I have read Mortal Instruments and Infernal Devices, with Infernal Devices being one of my top tier series of all time. My very first URL on Tumblr was Hannah Herondale because I loved Will that much. Point being, I knew I would like her writing, and so I'm glad that the story lived up to it as well. And I was holding this up. This is the ARC, which I was lucky enough to get, and then the publisher did send me a finished version also, but this is in hardcover, so I read out of the ARC. I was thinking that I would end up getting rid of one of these after I read it, but I just don't think I can. They're both so special to me. So that's where we're at with that. Our last book is Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. Divine Rivals was one of my absolute favorite books. It was my favorite book of 2023, and I still love it so much. So the fact that we got a prequel to that series, I was so excited about. Rebecca has some of the most has some of the most beautiful writing that I've ever read in my entire life, and this book, no exception. It did feel long, just being straight up with you guys. I think the writing is so beautiful, but there is very little plot here. If you are someone who reads for plot, this will probably be a book that's frustrating to you. But I think if you're in the mood to just sit and soak up a story, characters, you really like Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows, and you just want more, this is a great place to go. But it's not a high-octane, adventurous, entertaining story in the same way that a lot of the romantasy that I really love is. So I think, yeah, if you're looking for something a little bit more sleepy, atmospheric, a lot more fibrous, beautiful writing that you can sink your teeth into, this is your book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I did think it was really beautiful. I liked that the whole thing wasn't centered around Enva and Dager. They were very much side characters in this still, but it gave us enough to understand where they were coming from and what kicked off Divine Rivals. My favorite part of this was the epilogue for sure, and I feel like that tied together the series more than anything else did. So I would recommend this one. Again, if you already are a Divine Rivals fan. If you have not read Divine Rivals, I don't really think you'll like this book very much. I also don't think that you need to have read Ruthless Vows before you read this. You could read this second or after all of them completely, just not first. And that's Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. Okay, and that's everything that I read in the month of September. Thank you for hanging out with me while we talked about these. I feel like this video is longer than my wrap-ups usually are, and it's just because I had a lot to say. One of my goals in 2026 and just moving forward in my reading life is to read more deeply and to, when I'm talking about books, really be able to tell you about the world building, the plot, the themes, like the things that make you really love a story when they're done well, versus just saying like, here's a quick snippet of what's it about and here's how I generally felt about it. I don't think that's necessarily useful for people when you're trying to figure out whether a book would be for you. So anyway, that's kind of the direction I'm trying to head. We'll see if it actually happens. But there you have it. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and thanks for coming to this video. Bye.